Imagine walking into a diner where the coffee is still steaming and the bacon is sizzling, but there is not a single person inside. You look down at the floor and see a pile of clothes perfectly laid out, as if the person inside them just vanished into thin air. Elias was a long-haul trucker who was just trying to do his job. It was 4 in the morning when he pulled his big Peterbilt truck into the outskirts of Oakhaven. He was tired and looking forward to finishing his delivery. But as soon as he crossed the town line, his GPS screen turned bright white and then went totally black. His radio didn't work either. Every single station was just loud, scratching static that made his ears ring. Then he noticed the silence. If you have ever been outside at night, you know it is never actually quiet. You usually hear the sound of crickets, the wind in the trees, or a distant dog barking. But Oakhaven was dead. There were no birds chirping for the morning. There were no bugs buzzing. The silence was so heavy it felt like it was pressing against his chest. He slowed down his truck as he reached the main street. That is when he saw the first sign that something was very wrong. A bright red SUV was sitting right in the middle of the road. The driver's door was swung wide open. The engine was still running, making a low rumbling sound that echoed off the quiet buildings. Elias stopped his truck and got out. He called out to see if anyone was hurt, but nobody answered him. He looked inside the red car and saw a half-eaten sandwich on the seat. A cell phone was still plugged into the charger. It looked like the driver had just stepped out for a second, but the street was empty. He walked further down the road and found 5 more cars just like it. All of them were idling with their lights on, but there were no drivers. He decided to check Mabel's kitchen. It was the only diner in town that stayed open all night for travelers like him. The open sign was flickering in the window. The smell of fresh coffee hit him as soon as he pushed the heavy wooden door open. He saw a plate of eggs and toast sitting on the counter. Steam was still rising from the yellow yolks. A spatula was sitting on the grill right next to some strips of bacon that were starting to burn and smoke. But Mabel was not there. The customers were not in their booths. The whole place was a ghost town with the lights still on. That is when Elias looked down at the floor. He saw something that made his blood turn into ice water. Right in front of the cash register was a pile of clothes. It was not just a mess of laundry. The jeans were flat on the floor. The shirt was tucked into the waist. The socks were still inside the shoes. It looked like a person had just evaporated while they were standing there. Their body was gone, but their clothes stayed behind. Elias felt his heart racing in his chest. He ran back to his truck, but he realized he could not just leave. He felt a weird pressure in his ears, like he was deep underwater. He drove toward the police station, hoping to find help. The police station was a small brick building on the corner of the town square. He burst through the front doors. The lights were humming loudly. Every single phone in the building was ringing at the same time, but nobody was picking them up. He went behind the front desk and looked at the computer screens. They were all showing the same thing, fuzzy gray static. He found the security room and looked at the recorded footage. The clocks on the screen all showed the same time. At exactly 12:03 a.m., the video turned into noise. 1 second people were walking around, and the next second, they were just gone. Elias heard a small noise coming from a dark hallway. He grabbed a heavy metal flashlight and slowly walked toward the sound. He found a young woman named Sarah. She was shaking and sitting on the floor in the corner of a dark storage room. Sarah told him she had been at a local spa. She was inside a sensory deprivation tank when the event happened. That tank is like a big bathtub filled with salt water that blocks out all sound and light so you can relax. She said she did not see anything, but she felt a deep, low vibration that made her teeth hurt. It was a hum, a sound so low that you feel it in your bones more than you hear it in your ears. When she finally climbed out of the tank, the spa was empty. Everyone's towels and robes were just lying on the tile floor. Elias and Sarah decided they had to stick together. They went to the local elementary school to see if anyone was hiding there. The school was creepy. The doors were unlocked, and the hallways were filled with colorful drawings made by the kids. They went into a 3rd grade classroom. The teacher's coffee mug was still on the desk, and the liquid was still warm. But the chalkboard was the weirdest part. It was not covered in math problems or spelling words. Someone had drawn the same symbol over and over again. It was a triangle inside a circle with a line through it. It looked like it was drawn in a big hurry. The chalk lines were thick and messy, covering the entire green board. They checked the fish tank in the back of the room. The water was there, and the plastic plants were there. But the goldfish were gone. Not dead, just missing. Every single living thing in the town had vanished in a heartbeat. They tried to drive out of the town toward the highway, but they could not get more than a mile past the town sign. They hit a wall. It was not a brick wall. It was a clear, shimmering veil that felt like thick jelly when they touched it. It stretched up into the sky as far as they could see. They were trapped inside a giant, invisible bubble. They went to the mayor's office next. Elias thought the mayor might have known something about what was happening. The office was a total mess. Papers were scattered everywhere, and a heavy wooden desk had been flipped over on its side. Sarah found a black ledger tucked into a hidden safe behind a painting. It was filled with names and numbers. There were records of huge payments. Millions of dollars were being sent to a company called Aether-Tech. Elias had never heard of them, but the notes said the company was using Oakhaven as a controlled environment. The people living here were not just residents. They were living in a giant science experiment without even knowing it. Suddenly, the air in the room started to shimmer. Elias looked down the hallway and saw a person walking toward them. But it was not a real person. It was like a ghost or a blurry video. It was a man in a suit holding a briefcase. The man did not see them. He just walked to a door, turned a handle that was not there, and disappeared. Sarah called these things echoes. They were like recordings of the townspeople playing on a loop. They saw a woman walking a dog that was not there. They saw a kid chasing a ball that had vanished. It was like the town was trying to remember what it looked like before everyone disappeared. Then the low hum came back. It was much louder this time. Elias felt a sharp pain in the back of his head. His nose started to bleed, dripping red onto his shirt. The windows in the office suddenly exploded outward. Glass flew everywhere like sparkling rain. Sarah screamed and covered her head as the sound got louder and louder. Shadows started to move in the corners of the room. These were not the echoes. These were dark, tall shapes. They did not look like people. They looked like holes in the air. They were darker than the darkest night. Elias and Sarah ran out of the building. They headed toward the local hardware store on the edge of the square. They had noticed something strange about the building earlier. It had way more security cameras than a normal shop. Inside the back room, they found a heavy metal door. It led down to a basement that was not on any town maps. The basement was huge and cold. It was filled with silver machines that looked like they belonged in a movie. Cables as thick as tree trunks ran across the floor. Large tanks of glowing blue liquid lined the walls. They found a desk with a computer that was still working. Sarah started reading the files as fast as she could. The project was called Phase Shift. The goal was to move objects into a different dimension to save time. But the experiment had gone horribly wrong. The machine had accidentally shifted the entire town at once. Oakhaven was not really gone. It was just out of sync. It was like a radio station stuck between two channels. They were trapped in a void between the real world and somewhere else. And they were running out of time. A big monitor on the wall started flashing red. It showed a countdown clock with only 48 minutes left. If the clock hit 0, the shift would become permanent. The town and everyone in it would be stuck forever. The shadow figures they saw outside were actually the townspeople. They were trying to come back to their own world, but they could not get their bodies to turn solid again. They were stuck as scary shadows, reaching out for help. Elias looked at a photo taped to the side of the computer monitor. He felt his knees get weak and shaky. It was a picture of a man in a white lab coat. The man was smiling and holding a younger version of Elias. It was his father. His dad had disappeared 20 years ago when Elias was just a little boy. Elias always thought his dad had just left his family, but he was actually the lead scientist for Aether-Tech. He had designed the very machine that was now destroying the town. Elias felt a mix of anger and sadness. A log entry on the computer explained that the machine needed a specific biological key to work. The key was based on his father's own DNA. That is why Elias was the only one who could get into the town. His truck delivery was not an accident. The machine had pulled him in because it recognized his bloodline. He was the only person in the world who could stop the countdown and bring the people back. Sarah found a map of the machine's power grid. The main transmitter was hidden inside the old water tower. They ran out of the hardware store and headed for the tower. It was the tallest structure in the valley. The shadow figures were everywhere now. They were not just standing in corners. They were moving toward them. They seemed desperate and angry. They grabbed at Elias's jacket with cold, misty hands that felt like ice. Sarah used a heavy wrench to swing at them, but her tool just passed right through their dark bodies. They reached the base of the water tower. A long, rusty ladder led all the way to the very top. Elias started climbing. The wind was howling now, and the sky was turning a strange shade of deep purple. He reached the top platform and found a control panel. It was covered in buttons and a large iron lever. A voice came over a hidden speaker. It was a recorded message from his father, left many years ago. The message said that if the machine ever failed, someone would have to hold the override switch by hand. The pulse of energy would be too strong for a human to survive. It was a mission with no return. Elias looked down at Sarah. She was at the bottom of the ladder, fighting off the shadows as best she could. He knew what he had to do. He reached out and grabbed the metal lever with both of his hands. The hum turned into a deafening roar. White light began to pour out of the water tower, blinding everything. Elias felt like his body was being pulled apart. He saw flashes of his father's face and his own childhood. He felt a massive surge of electricity. It did not hurt exactly, but it felt like he was becoming part of the air. With a final, loud boom, the light exploded across the entire valley. The shimmering veil shattered like glass. Down in the streets, the shadow figures began to change. They turned from black silhouettes back into people. Mabel appeared back in her kitchen, still holding her spatula. The man with the briefcase appeared in the office. The kids in the classroom popped back into their seats. They were all confused and looked very tired. None of them remembered being gone. To them, it felt like only a single second had passed by. Sarah stood at the bottom of the tower and looked up. The purple sky was gone, replaced by a normal sunrise. She climbed the ladder to the top, calling out Elias's name. But the platform was completely empty. There was no sign of the trucker. His father's machine was gone too, leaving only scorched metal behind. The only thing she found was Elias's old trucker hat. It was sitting right where he had been standing. The town went back to being a normal, quiet place. But the people were not exactly the same as before. Every single person who had disappeared had a mark on their arm. It was the same symbol from the chalkboard. The triangle inside the circle was etched into their skin like a faint, silver scar that would not go away. They did not know how it got there. They did not even know they had been missing for hours. Sarah stayed in Oakhaven, hoping Elias might come back one day. She knew the truth about the company. She knew that the town was still being watched. The experiment might have ended, but the mystery was not over. Sometimes at night, she still hears that low hum. She looks at the water tower and wonders where Elias went. Is he in another dimension? Is he watching them from the void? No one has the answers yet. The town that disappeared overnight is back on the map, but it will never be the same again. The town is located in a deep valley in the Pacific Northwest, surrounded by thick, dark pine trees. The trees are so tall that they block out the sun for most of the morning. This makes the town feel cold. Elias had been driving for 12 hours before he arrived. He was delivering a crate of specialized glass. He did not know the glass was for the machine. He was just a man trying to make a living. When he first noticed the silence, he thought he was just getting a bad headache from the road. He remembered his father telling him stories about the places between. He never knew what that meant. Now he understood that his father was talking about the dimension where the town had gone. Mabel's kitchen had been there for 40 years. She was famous for her big blueberry pancakes. When Elias walked in, he saw a calendar on the wall. The date was circled in bright red marker. It was the anniversary of his father's disappearance. That was not a coincidence. It was a sign. The piles of clothes were the most disturbing part for him. He saw a pair of tiny sneakers near the door. They belonged to a child. The laces were still tied. The person had literally walked out of their skin. He wondered if they felt any pain. Sarah said she only felt the vibration in her teeth. She described the sensation as being like a cold wind blowing through her heart. It was very lonely. Oak Creek Elementary was built in the 1950s. It had long hallways and old wooden floors. The symbols on the board were drawn with yellow chalk. Sarah noticed that the chalk was still warm. This meant the person drawing them had vanished only seconds before they arrived at the school. The symbols were everywhere. They were scratched into the desks and even carved into the wooden doors. Elias found a notebook in the teacher's desk. It belonged to a young girl named Emily. The last page of the notebook was filled with the same symbol. She had drawn it hundreds of times.